So I am talking about regulatory readiness and the role of health claims in promoting foods. And I'm with the Food Industry Division, which is a small group within Agriculture Canada that is focused on trying to help the food industry find new opportunities so that they can compete in global marketplaces. So as you're well aware, there's lots of pressures in the marketplace, both from the consumer demand side and from the agriculture side. And somehow we have to come to grips with how we're going to work together in order to have access to new market opportunities that are often driven by consumer values or personal preferences, including nutrition and health, with the reality that we're losing our arable land, that we're having to deal with shifting climate, different shifts in growing seasons, and pressures on the entire system. And what we want to try and do is optimize opportunities from both directions. So when industry is looking at trying to develop a new product, they want to take advantage of those consumer preferences and find out what the value add or the premium pricing might be with a particular product. They need to know where their inputs are going to come from, whether or not they've got skilled labor or product safety protocols in place. And then they often come and talk to me about, well, what health claims can I use? And I want to do this, and I want to position it to this particular group of people. And at the very end of that product development process, somebody will very reluctantly say, and what do I have to do to get Health Canada to approve it? And it's always Health Canada is the bad guy. That's the bad guy sitting right there. And the good news is that Will and I work very closely together, and so he's going to get the brunt of my presentation, I think. And what I want to leave you with today is you can't wait until the end of your product development cycle to start thinking about the regulatory environment. Because by then, it's too late. You're going to have a time lag before you can get your product into the marketplace. And I can remember when I first joined agriculture, not that many years ago. I've had the pleasure of several different careers before I joined the federal government. Meeting this guy in Vancouver, really neat researcher, second career opportunity. He had remortgaged his house and bet his personal finances on a product that he thought was going to legitimately resolve a health problem. What he hadn't banked on was that it was going to require pre-market approvals, and it would probably take 4 or 5 years before this product would go into the marketplace successfully. He lost it all. He had to declare bankruptcy. I don't like telling people that they're going to run the risk of going into bankruptcy, so that's why the role that I try and play in agriculture is to help people understand that there are regulatory obligations. It's not because Will doesn't want you to sell your product, but there's due diligence that we all have to do when we start introducing new things into the marketplace. And the more you can inform yourself about what those regulatory obligations are, the easier it will be to get your product into the marketplace. So what is it that the regulators are concerned about? And I am not a regulator. I don't work for CFIA. I don't work for Health Canada. I am Agriculture Canada. I am focused on business opportunities. But because so many business opportunities get stuck, I have a small role to play on helping people navigate the regulatory environment. So regulators are primarily concerned about safety. Is everything that you've done to that product or commodity safe for consumers to eat? Are you saying anything about that product that might be misleading to the consumer? Do they really understand the value-added proposition that you want to provide the consumer? Have you got the science to substantiate what you're saying? Can you back up? Can you walk the talk? And then there are compliance obligations, and I've only put up the Food and Drugs Act, Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act, and the Safe Food for Canadians Act, because those are the ones that predominantly address food. But there are many other acts. There's all, we talked about the meat code this morning. There's environmental protection issues depending upon what you're doing. The regs are massive. There are transportation regs that you may need to be aware of. So you have to do your homework, because at the end of the day, the manufacturer and the distributor are legally responsible to ensure that their product complies with all of the regulations. So learn it early. That way you'll get into the marketplace fast. So really, there are 5 pretty basic questions that the regulators that you need to know when you're trying to decide if you're ready to go into the regulatory environment with a new product, either because, well, we'll get to that later. So 5 key questions. Which regulatory framework is my product going to be assessed under? Are all the ingredients and things that I'm adding to my product approved for use in Canada? What do I get to say on my product label? When have I gone too far? Do I require a pre-market approval? Because that will delay or that will require significant time before you can get into the market. And the last one is, what time do I need? So these are pretty basic questions, but you know, everybody's focused on the day-to-day. You're trying to get the business running, and so you don't necessarily think about this stuff early on. So one of the things that my team did a few years ago is try and come up with a logic flow model. We're currently in the process of revamping this, but the logic is still the same, and I'm going to walk you through that. I thought I brought copies of this logic model, but what I did put on the table at the back is a brief summary of the regulations and some of the topics that we're talking about, with links to all of the appropriate websites. So it's a bit of a cheat sheet at the back. But this is a logic flow that brings you through those steps, the 5 questions that I talked about, and I've sort of focused my presentation around those 5 steps. So when we're talking about food products, there's really only 2 regulatory environments that you need to worry about. Are you a food or are you a natural health product? And it used to be very messy, but a significant amount of work has been done in the last 2 years to clarify this, so there isn't as much confusion. But basically you want to put yourself in the role of the consumer. When they go and buy this product, are they buying it to quench their thirst, to eat for satisfaction, or are they buying it to get a health benefit immediately? If it's in the form of a food or a drink or a snack bar, it's regulated as a food. If it's a dosage form, an elixir, a pill, a cream, a single serving shot, then we don't tend to think of those as food. We think of a product that's going to provide us with an immediate health benefit. And so that would fall under the natural health product. There is a classification document on Health Canada's website that will steer you through this process, but you want to get into the right regulatory framework right from the start, otherwise you waste a lot of time spinning your wheels. And I think the other way to look at the difference between natural health products and food is that we eat food ad libitum. When we had lunch today at the buffet, nobody was measuring their portion size. I had the pleasure, part of the joy of coming out to Alberta is I have nephews that live out here. So like good nephews, they took their aunt, they had their aunt over for dinner, and like good Albertans, they served beef. Well, the quantity of beef that they put on their plate is about the quantity that I would feed my entire family, but that's their single serving. So when it comes to getting a health benefit with food, you have to think of the serving size especially. The other way I look at it is the teenage boy phenomenon. I eat a single slice of bread, they eat the entire loaf. So how does that transfer into a health benefit? And that's one of the very legitimate concerns that Health Canada and CFIA are looking at when they're assessing the regulatory environment. What's an appropriate amount to have in food that's going to be eaten by a full life cycle age cohort versus medicinal purposes in a single portion size? Very challenging when it comes to food. The second question is, are all of the ingredients approved for use in Canada? Many of you will be familiar with minor use pesticides or veterinary drugs that are approved in the United States, other countries, but aren't approved in Canada. And a lot of the time, it's just because the Canadian market size is too tiny. It doesn't warrant the paperwork to get that product into Canada. Our market is the same size as California. So every once in a while you run into an ingredient, a sweetener, an additive, color, that may not have had regulatory approval in Canada. So you need to look at everything that you're using and your processing technique, make sure it's approved for use in Canada. I'm going to talk very briefly about novel foods, novel fibers, and skip over additives a bit. So when it comes to novel foods, language is critical. Often when I'm meeting with companies, they go, oh, I've got this great novel product. That's good. You can have a great novel product, but when you're talking to a regulator, Novel is a very defined terminology, and right away you have this disconnect in communication. Innovative, exciting, brand new, that's perfect. In the regulatory environment, novel means that this is a process that has never been used before. There is no history of safe use, particularly in a Canadian equivalent population, or we're into genetic engineering. And all of that means that you need a pre-market safety assessment. And it really is about safety. But GMO is really complicated, and we need to understand that not only is there consumer acceptance, there are all these other complicating factors like intellectual property rights, whether or not you're going to label as containing GMO or free from GMO, what kind of segregation techniques do you have to make sure that you're preserving that uniqueness and that it's not going to contaminate other products, or it's going to get you the value add that you think. And I think one of the things that we forget about, particularly when we initially got into genetic engineering, was that initially all the benefit was at the producer level. You were increasing yields, you were using arable land, you were able to grow crops in land that may not have been arable. Consumers don't get that. Consumers are totally disconnected from their food supply. Very few consumers understand that those little mini carrots don't grow that way. You know, it sounds a bit condescending. There are real foodies, and then there's the rest of the population, and they've just never thought about it. And they've just never thought about it. It's not good, bad, or indifferent. And one of the challenges when it comes to genetic modification is how do we transfer the value to agriculture to the value to the consumer, so they're not totally focused on avoidance, that they understand that there is some benefit somewhere along the line to them, either because it's a golden rice, or most recently in Canada we've got this Arctic apple. Huge controversy, don't know how it's going to fall out, but one of the benefits of Health Canada's website, there's total transparency now. Any new approved, and I've only done enough to fit on a slide, there are others. Any product that has been approved for use in Canada with genetic engineering components is on a website so that everybody can see. Recently, Health Canada modified the fibre definition, and the big motivator to do that was so that it would align with the fibre definition in other countries. But it does allow for a broader use of materials as a fibre. It designates that you can have a lower energy value because one of the roles of fiber is to go right through you, and it gives you some predefined claims in terms of laxation or regularity. It talks about lowering cholesterol levels. It can delay postprandial response, all very positive health benefits. So you need to know whether or not some of the material that you're using is going to be considered in this definition for fiber, or if it's not, it's going to be, whoops, I could have cut that back. If it's a fiber that you have created, then it needs to go through a novel fiber safety assessment to make sure that there are no adverse reactions to it. You can still use it once it's approved for use, and then in good government legalese, once you've been approved for use, you're no longer a novel fiber, you're just a dietary fiber. So again, we do create some communication challenges that way, but what the message is, we're open for business. There are other fiber sources that you might be able to use. Other areas where you need to look and make sure your ingredients have been approved for use in Canada are food additives and vitamin and minerals. Food additives, we now have a very efficient system using administrative lists that are posted on the website. It's updated probably weekly. I seem to be getting updates as to what new food additives have been approved for use in a specific type of product. Simple, check the website. It's either approved or not approved. If it's not approved, call up Health Canada, find out what kind of data they need, get it approved. It's not meant to be a closed door. It just means that you need to take the time to give them some information so that they can assess what you're planning to do, whether or not the quantities are the same. Similar process with vitamins and minerals. Canada has a very prescriptive process for adding vitamins and minerals. It's not because they're anal. It's because all vitamins and minerals have a minimum dose where if you're not getting enough, you're going to see a deficiency reaction, which we talked a bit about this morning. But if you have too much, you're either going to have some competitive absorption where nutrient A is competing against nutrient B. So by having, say, a lot of magnesium, you're not going to get adequate amounts of phosphorus. I'm sorry, Harvey, I can't remember if those are competitive absorptions or not. So we need to balance what's good for everybody, and we need to keep the teenage boy in mind because they're going to eat way more quantities of this than somebody else. So there's a cap on it. If you want to add additional nutrients, then you need to talk to Health Canada and use what's called a temporary marketing authorization. Find out what nutrient, what level, what food, and you're obligated in that process to collect some consumer data to make sure that the consumers understand that you've actually fortified this product with a different nutrient. They're buying it for that reason. Are they still taking their vitamin mineral supplement? Have they dropped eating certain other foods? Is that going to have an impact on their nutrient profile? So it's all about communication. If you want to do it, you need to find out what your regulatory responsibilities are. So then what you thought I was going to talk about were health claims. So I'm slowly getting there. Every processed product in Canada has to have a nutrition label, and it has some mandatory labeling requirements. So we're going to talk very briefly about the mandatory requirements, and I'm going to skip over some of them because Will's going to talk about the updated changes to those ingredient lists and nutrition facts table. And then we're going to look at the family of health claims and figure out what it is you want to say. So from a safety perspective, we all know that there are individuals who have food allergies, and sometimes food allergies can have very serious reactions such as anaphylactic shock. So Canada has identified 10 allergens plus sulfites that must be identified on the product label because they pose a health and safety risk to individuals. And they've also provided a process where you can sort of say, what is the risk? Is it because these things are identified in the product? Were they prepared on a production line, the same production line as an allergen? Or are they prepared in a plant that is using these allergens? And of course your level of risk goes up and down depending upon the close proximity of those allergens in the food. So what we want to do is make sure that we protect those people who are most vulnerable, and we've done that. We've made it mandatory to pull out the actual allergens on the label so that if you are containing one of those 10 allergens, you absolutely make it clear to consumers that your product contains that. And we're trying to get away from the may contain. And the may contain, let's face it, if you've got a health allergy, well, let's back up. If you're the food manufacturer and you're making a product and you can't tell me if it contains an allergen, how good is your quality assurance? I would have a lot of doubt, not only about the allergens, but about a few other things. From the consumer perspective, when you say may contain, they're not going to be able to eat it because they just don't want to take that risk. So may contain isn't very helpful. So that's why you'll see more and more. I think this came out in 2012, I believe. So you should be seeing products identifying the allergens right on the list. Transparency, consumer education. So as I said, I'm not going to talk anymore about the nutrition facts or the ingredient list because there have been some recent changes proposed, and there have been some recent changes proposed about nutrition facts table. So that's going to be the focus of Will's talk. But I am going to go straight through a reminder on what required pre-market approvals and where you're going to need additional time, and we're going to go through the different types of health claims. So these are the different types of health claims, and we group them in two parts because if you're talking about quantitative composition of your product, it's a numbers game. You have X amount of vitamin A, X amount of vitamin C. You're telling the consumer very factual information. That's what you want on your product label. Consumers get it. Nutrition has been hot for a long time. Matter of fact, my entire career I've been told nutrition is the up-and-coming field, and it's an excellent one to be in. We haven't quite had the public health benefits of nutrition, but but nutrient content claims are absolutely where you want to go. Nutrient content claims tend to be linked to to nutrients that are within the nutrition facts table. And it's everything from a good source, excellent source claim. It could be a comparative claim. Product A contains 25% more of similar product, but it's very factual based on the numbers. For nutrients that are not listed in the nutrition facts table, they can be quantitatively described below the nutrition facts table. So for instance, some of the upcoming antioxidants or nutrients that are getting interest, macular degeneration in an aging population, we're very interested in the amount of lutein or zeaxanthin in products, because those nutrients are more and more are collecting a body of science that may have a health benefit down the line. The first step is to have the consumer associate that nutrient with your product. You're not making any other claim, it just contains. Very simple, very easy to do, no pre-market requirement. The final one is a nutrient function claim. These are well-recognized, documented nutrient function statements that the nutrition community sanctions and has known about. They're all the things your mother told you when you were little. Drink your milk because it will give you strong bones. Eat your carrots because they have vitamin A, and vitamin A is good for night vision. These are consensus-built statements about the nutrient. So if you use a nutrient function claim, you've got two things. You've got the quantity of the nutrient, and then you've got the nutrient is good for whatever. Very factual. If you're not using those claims on your product right now, you have no business thinking about health claims, because those are a done deal. There's no decisions, it's factual, it's easy, it's low-hanging fruit, and the consumer gets that. So that's where you need to start, and those are the ones that require no interference from any regulator. Where it gets tricky is when we get into the health claims. And health claims are now where we're moving the food into an actual relationship with disease. Very rarely are we saying something positive. It's more about disease risk reduction. Most of the health claims in Canada are about that. But general health claims can link your product to Canada's Food Guide. We heard this morning about Canada Food Guide. It's often quoted that Canada's Food Guide is the second most distributed government resource besides the income tax forms. That's pretty good. The fact that most of them are distributed through the school system, which then end up in the playground, is a slight different manner. But you can do things like saying, Canada's Food Guide says eat at least one serving of dark green vegetables a day. Guess what? 1 cup of spinach, I think it's half a cup of spinach is a serving of green vegetable. Relates your product to good health. Positive message for the consumer, absolutely. A function claim is kind of similar, where you're saying 1/4 cup of my cereal contains 7 grams of fiber from coarse wheat, which promotes regularity, or which improves laxation, that kind of thing. They're absolutely government-approved functions associated with a specific ingredient. When we get to disease risk reduction claims and therapeutic claims, we're really crossing over into the health benefit side. And this is where it's all about the science. And I'm going to show you a slide. 2 years ago, I had the pleasure of traveling through Italy. It's a wonderful city if you get to go there. And of course, Michelangelo's David's there, and a whole bunch of headless statues are everywhere. Everywhere. Between cathedrals and statues, I've seen it all. And all of them have godlike physiques. But that's not what we see when we walk around North America. We see a considerable increase in obesity, in diabetes, in heart disease. So then the challenge is, how do you take those multifactorial, very complex diseases, which we've already heard about this morning, have a genetic component and an environment component, and say, yeah, but if you have half a serving of my product, you don't have to worry about those diseases. It's It's not likely going to happen, and you're going to find that the consumer is going to be a bit skeptical. So when you look at the list of disease risk reduction or therapeutic claims that Health Canada has approved, all of these are on the website, you'll notice that the vast majority of the ones more recently approved are tied to a very specific health indicator, because it's much easier to measure a lowering of cholesterol than it is to say a reduced risk of heart disease. Because how do you know? There's too many other things going on. But you can measure lower cholesterol response. So that's one of the challenges when it comes to linking your product with a health claim. We need to make sure that we have the right science. And of course, science is expensive. Just ask any researcher. We know that clinical trials are in the $1 million range, and you're probably going to need more than one. So you really need to figure out what is the benefit of staying with, of pursuing a health claim versus staying with those pre-approved nutrient content, nutrient function claims. It's a personal decision. There are benefits to both, but as soon as you cross the line to the health claims, you need to be thinking about, do I understand my food and how it behaves during processing? Are the bioactives that were in there in the raw ingredients still going to be there at the end of processing? Are they going to have enough of those bioactives to get a health effect? If I look at the literature, what is the literature saying? Because the wording on the label is tied directly to the science. If all of the studies were in children of a certain age group and they ended up with stronger bone density, then your health claim is going to say this product may improve the bone density of children between X and Z years of age. So don't get ahead of your science, because that's only going to get you in trouble. One of the other challenges in the nutrition environment is that people are trying to avoid more things than they're trying to consume. And so it's not just about your nutritional profile of the bioactive, it's what's not in there, or what are the levels. And we know trans fat, sodium, and sugar are the bad boys right now. I'm sure in the next decade we'll come up with something else. But there's no point investing in health and bioactive if you're still high in some of those other components that the consumer wants to avoid. And how long does it take? It depends on you and the quality of your submission, and whether or not you have done due diligence in completing a pre-market application. Most of the pre-market approvals at Health Canada, the backlog is being reduced aggressively. So I think you need to understand that they have centralized the submission process. They do have some markers and defined communication points so that they can let you know where your submission is. And most importantly, they are quite willing to talk to you in advance of making that submission. And that's where you'll really find out what it is you need to go in the direction you're going to, and the timelines. Because at the end of the day, the whole point of my presentation is to say your business plan, your marketing plan, and your regulatory requirements all have to line up. If they don't line up, you're going to end up in trouble. And usually it means paying more money than you want to, because there's been a delay in getting your product in the marketplace.